Our next panel is going to talk about some new innovations in firearms examination. Our first speaker, with respect to this panel, I've already introduced moderator and speaker Matthew Gamette earlier, but our first speaker for this panel will be Daniel Lamont. He is a forensic scientist with the Baltimore Police Department. He began his career with the Baltimore Police in 2005 and was served as a crime lab technician, then moved into Firearms Examination Unit in 2007. In 2010, he was promoted to Firearms Examiner and has now had approximately 9 years' experience as a firearms examiner. He's testified as an expert witness in firearms identification, operability, and examination approximately 300 times. He's a member of the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners. Also on the panel is Jason Cole. Jason began his career as a police officer in Sandy City, Utah. In 2001, he left that department and began working in a forensic services position in West Valley, Utah, where he worked for approximately 9 years. And during that time, he was awarded the Utah International Association of Identification Award for his work. He left that position for a latent print examiner position in Henderson, Nevada Police Department. I meant to say that the award that Jason received was an award for outstanding achievement, and he received that in 2005. In Nevada, he served as the Nevada division of the International Association of Identification Board of Directors, and he's been their representative since 2010 at the national level. He and he's on their board of directors. He is currently working as a specialist, a subject matter specialist for Foster and Freeman, who work with forensic materials and equipment for individual departments and agencies. So I'll turn this over to Matthew Gamette.
Thanks, Matt. So part of the value that we hope to bring to this conference is bringing in practitioners to talk about what's going on in the field and also what's new in the fields. So what we're hoping to do here is to talk a little bit about firearms examination in a little bit of a new model, something we're trying, something that Matt and I have visited a long time about, which is we're going to bring in the basics of firearms analysis. We're just going to talk very basic. What do you need to know if you're a prosecutor or defense attorney and you have a firearms analyst that comes up to testify? What are some of the basics of the science? He's also going to talk about some of the techniques and technologies that are available. Then we're going to transition and we're going to talk about a technology. Because the other thing that's really important to know is there are a lot of new things coming about in the field, not only in firearms, but there's also this new technique that we're going to talk about that kind of combines firearms and latent prints. So we want to talk about the technology transfer from being developed all the way to getting it to the laboratory so that you understand that process, and also so that you can see some of the new technologies that are exciting that are coming about in the field. So we hope that you enjoy this panel today, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our firearms examiner. Daniel, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. Some of what I'm going to go over is, as Matt said, fairly basic. One thing I found in testifying as much as I have is the idea of firearms examination and the science of it is understood and it can be conveyed. But when I get on the stand, what I find is not only state's attorneys, but defense attorneys will start asking questions, and some of the basic terminology that's basic to me being in the field and a gun person is not basic to everybody else. And as I start talking about marks that I'm looking at, individual characteristics, things like that, I see blank looks in the middle of a trial. So it never really occurred to me that that type of stuff that, again, is so basic to someone that does it every day isn't really basic to anyone else. One of the problems that we found, especially in Baltimore, is one of the ways to fix that quickly is pretrial conferences, which I know is under the gun as I am in the lab. The attorneys are the same way, so it's rare for us to have a pretrial conference. The biggest problem with that is when we get called to court with the state's attorney that it's their first gun trial. And we pretty much instantly know when it's their first gun trial because they have no idea what to ask us. A pretrial conference could have definitely helped that and made it go a lot smoother. So I try to do them, even if it's over the phone, if a state's attorney calls me and I understand it's their first trial, second trial, I'll quickly kind of have a pretrial with them just to give them basic terminology to understand this is what you should ask me, these are the terms I'm going to use. As basic as it is to me, it's not to you, and that also means it's not that to the jury, so they're not going to understand what I'm talking about. So what I'll go over quickly is the principles and science of firearms examination. I'm going to give a very brief history of how firearms examination began, the comparison of fired evidence. Our range of conclusions, what it is we may be able to tell you about the evidence, and it depends on the evidence itself, what we're going to be able to conclude about it. And then I'm going to very briefly touch on some other tools that we use in firearms, a new system that's being used that is not technically firearms examination related, but it is impacting what we do in the firearms lab. So to start, tool mark identification is a forensic science that has as its primary concern the determination of whether or not a tool mark was made by a specific tool. Firearms falls under this science in that the firearm in a case is the tool being used. So there's three main types of tools that are going to leave marks. There's compression tools, which shows the outline of the tool actually being used. In firearms, that would be the breech face leaving a mark, or the firing pin leaving a mark on the cartridge case. There are sliding tool marks, which it shows the parallel striations when a tool slides against another surface. In firearms, that would be the landing groove striations left on a bullet as it travels down the barrel of a firearm. And then there's cutting tool marks, which would be scissors or wire cutters actually cutting through a surface. So the process for firearms identification is the microscopic comparison of these individual marks and the potential identification of bullets and cartridge cases to a unique firearm, to one particular firearm. This foundation is based on three main principles. Those three principles are, in firearms, that the rifling of the barrel of a firearm and the markings on the breech face and the firing pin of a firearm bear unique microscopic markings. This is due to manufacturing process, use, and wear of that particular tool. These characteristics mark the bearing surfaces of the bullets and cartridge cases during the firing of a firearm. And these individual characteristics are reproducible and identifiable to a particular firearm. So to give just a very brief, how did this begin? It was started by Calvin Goddard in 1925, wherein he modified a comparison microscope to be able to look at two pieces of fired evidence, bullets and cartridge cases, at the same time to be able to compare them, to look at markings back and forth between the two, to determine whether or not they match each other and were possibly fired from the same firearm. This was actually done right here in New York City. He ran a group called the Bureau of Forensic Ballistics. In 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre took place, and Calvin Goddard was actually asked to come in and look at the evidence from that case. They found a suspect in that case. They removed guns from that suspect's house. They asked Calvin Goddard to look at the bullets and cartridge cases from the scene to this suspect's guns that was recovered after this crime happened. Calvin Goddard was able to identify the evidence back to these particular firearms from this suspect. In doing that, he not only became the father of forensics firearms identification, but at the time, the Chicago Police Department was actually being accused of carrying out the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, trying to rid the city of gang crime. In doing this, he was able to show that the Chicago Police Department actually had nothing to do with it and was able to clear their name in being a part of that massacre that took place. So the comparison microscope, which Calvin Goddard modified, is still the primary tool used in firearms examination today. It utilizes two different stages where you can then look at multiple pieces of evidence at the same time, manipulating them back and forth under light to be able to look at the two pieces together under the oculars. So firearms examination, what we're looking at, it's based on the unique reproducible striations and impressions produced during the normal functioning of a firearm. These marks make it possible to identify cartridge cases and bullets back to a particular firearm. And that's based on different markings, and this is where I hope I don't bore you because it's just a few definitions of, again, things that I can spout out easily, but most people have no idea the actual parts of the guns that I'm talking about. So it's based on firing pin impressions, breech face markings, chamber marks, and landing groove striations. This slide here is just an example of something we'd be looking at. The head of the cartridge case, the center indent would be the firing pin impression. The parallel lines going around that in the, on the silver is from the breech face markings, and they can reach all the way out to the rim of the cartridge case also. So these are markings that we're looking at. So let me just give you a brief explanation of what these marks are and how they got there. Firing pin impression is the indentation in the primer of a centerfire cartridge case or on the rim of a rimfire cartridge case like a .22 that's put there by the firing pin actually striking the cartridge case when the trigger is pulled on the gun. The breech face marks, which again are the parallel lines that you see around that firing pin impression, are marks characteristic of the breech under the firing pin. When the firearm's fired, that cartridge case is pushed backwards as the bullet goes down the barrel, and the marks on that breech face can be transferred over to the cartridge case before it's ejected from the gun. Chamber marks, which these are just different examples of different shapes and markings of firing pins and breech faces. Chamber marks are marks that can actually be put on the sidewall of the cartridge case. And the way they get there is a couple different ways. Just from the actual chambering of a live cartridge, putting the cartridge into the chamber of the gun can leave marks on that. When the gun is fired, those chamber walls actually expand from the pressure. Those chamber marks inside that barrel and the chamber can be impressed onto that. And then actually when it's extracted and pulled out of the gun, chamber marks can be left on that. So it's just another marking that we can look at on a cartridge case. For bullets, there's landing groove striations. So as the bullet travels down the barrel of a gun, the markings inside the barrel of that gun can be transferred on the side of the bullet as it's going down. There's basically two main types of marks we look at. There's striations and there's impressions. Striations are contour variations on the surface of an object that's caused by both a combination of force and motion. That would be the bullet going down the barrel as it slides down the barrel of that gun. The landing grooves are forcing themselves onto the bullet, and they're also being put on as the bullet actually goes down the barrel. Impressions are surface contours that are caused just by force. Firing pin hitting the actual primer, the breech face slamming against the head of the cartridge case, just that force alone are the impressions that can be left. So what are we looking at? What types of marks? There's three main types of marks in firearms examination. That's the class characteristics, subclass characteristics, and individual characteristics. Excuse me. Class characteristics are measurable features of a specimen which indicate a restricted group source. These are made prior to the actual tool being made. This is decided. This would be things like the shape of the firing pin, the shape of the breech face, the caliber of the weapon itself, also general rifling characteristics. the twist of the lands and grooves inside the barrel, how many there's going to be. That's a class characteristic that is decided long before anything else is designed. Individual characteristics are marks produced by the random imperfections or irregularities of tool surfaces. These imperfections are produced incidental to manufacture. These are the marks that are caused by use, corrosion, or damage, and they're unique to a specific tool and distinguish it from all other tools. Subclass characteristics, excuse me, are surface features of an object that are more restrictive than class characteristics. They're produced incidental to manufacture. They relate to a smaller group source, and they change over time due to change of manufacturing process and tools being used. So when we're looking at these marks, what exactly are we trying to get to? What are we looking for? What are we trying to determine? AFTE, which is the Association of Firearms and Tool Marks Examiners, came up with a theory or a range of conclusions that we follow. It's pretty much followed by Firearms Examination. There's four main conclusions that we can come to. There's the identification, which means there's an agreement of all class characteristics and individual characteristics for us to identify that these two pieces of evidence fired from the same firearm. There's an elimination, which is a significant disagreement of possibly class characteristics and or individual characteristics that tell us that these two pieces of evidence don't match. If I have a 9mm cartridge case and I have a .45 caliber cartridge case, without doing any type of microscopic examination, I can tell you that they're not going to match. They don't come from the same firearm because they're two different calibers. There's no way for them to have been fired from the same firearm. An inconclusive result basically happens when there is some agreement of class characteristics and some agreement and disagreement of individual characteristics, meaning that there may just not be enough marks on the evidence. Most of the evidence that we receive in Baltimore, and I'm sure throughout most crime labs, is not perfect. It doesn't look like a perfect bullet. We get portions of it. We get things that aren't marked at all just because of the different ammo that's used, different guns that are used just don't mark as well. So there can be inconclusive results where we can't tell an investigator whether or not these match. There may be close, but there's just not enough information for us to give them a definite answer. The last conclusion is unsuitable. That basically just means that we get a lot of evidence that just has nothing on it. It's damaged. We get portions of bullets, just a small bullet jacket fragment from the morgue, from the hospital, where there's just no microscopic marks on the evidence. There's absolutely nothing for us to do but to identify and just tell you at best what it might be, a piece of a bullet, a piece of a lead fragment, something of that nature. So what exactly are these conclusions based on? In 1985, AFTE, Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners, their criteria for identification committee formalized the theory of identification as it relates to tool marks. This theory articulates three principles that provide the conceptual basis for comparing fired evidence. First one of those is that theory of identification enables opinions of common origin to be made when unique surface contours of two tool marks excuse me, are in sufficient agreement. That sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random tool marks as evidenced by the correspondence of a pattern or combination of patterns of surface contours. And AFTE does understand that the interpretation of individualization and identification is subjective in nature, but it's based on, excuse me, but founded on scientific principles and based on the examiner's training and experience that they go through and in working casework over the years. There is research that I'm definitely not going to get into. I think the next section actually gets a little further into it, but I will mention it. I actually have a slide in a few just giving a couple of the ideas. There is research going into trying to quantify what a firearms examiner sees. There's research been going for years trying to do that. As you'll see in a slide, I have a couple of them listed, just different basically names of what they're looking at. The different researchers are using different techniques and coming up with different ideas. It's not something right now that is generally accepted just because it's still being worked, it's still being researched, and I think what we're seeing is that quantifying that research is a little harder than maybe it was thought to be. So one of the other tools that we use, there's your basics of firearms examination. Some definitions, I hope I didn't bore you too bad. I know it can be very basic. One of the other tools that we use in firearms examination is the NIBIN or IBIS system. NIBIN is the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. IBIS is the Integrated Ballistic Identification System, the actual computer acquisition station. NIBIN uses 3D technology to attempt to link cases. The system is run by a private company called Ultra Electronic Forensic Technology, and it's distributed and subsidized by the ATF. The way IBIS works is basically going back, and I'll see if I can find it quickly. Going back to this slide, just to use as an example, what IBIS does is you take one of those cartridge cases, you actually insert it into the acquisition station. That acquisition station then takes all kinds of digital images from different lighting. It does a 3D topography of the firing pin and breech face impression. And it searches against the rest of the network looking for images that may be similar to that cartridge case that was put into the system. When that cartridge case is searched, correlation results come back. An examiner then sits down and looks at those correlation results to see if there's any possible links between cases that we didn't know of. Now, ATF recently, within the last maybe 8 months, has actually changed their protocol on what firearms units are doing now with that information. What we used to do with that information was, if we saw what might possibly be a link, we would have to have an actual examination of the evidence. So if there was a case we put in and it looks like it may be matched to another case, we would then microscopically compare those cartridge cases and do a full examination and to determine whether or not they were in fact a match to each other. This could be very time consuming in that you're linked up by region in NIBIN. So for Baltimore, we're linked up to probably 25 other departments in the general area of us. In Maryland, there's about 8 of them, but it goes to Delaware, Pennsylvania State Police, New York, Ohio. So if you have a correlation that looks like it may match to another jurisdiction, it's not always easy to transfer that evidence, go to that lab, or them come to our lab and do the examination. Some of this could be very time consuming, meaning that information wasn't getting to an investigator in a real timely manner. So what ATF switched to was an IBIS lead system. What that does is we look at the correlation still the exact same way we did. If we see one that may be a possible connection, we have a second examiner look at it on the system. We're not looking at the physical evidence, we're looking at the images that IBIS has brought back to us. If we agree that they may be a potential match, we send out with what is called an IBIS lead. That information goes out to our investigator to let them know that there is a potential IBIS lead between these 2 cases, possibly more cases if they've already been linked to something else. That IBIS lead, we let them know that it is not a confirmation. We have not microscopically compared this evidence. These cannot be used, and it says on our paperwork that it is a lead only. It's not confirmed, as you can see. They cannot use this for the establishment of probable cause for warrants because we have not microscopically confirmed this information. We let them know that this may be a connection. If they would like to find out and have that evidence microscopically compared, they then have to put a request into the firearms lab for us to physically do that microscopic comparison to give them a definite answer of whether or not that evidence matches to each other. So to go back, as of mid-May of 2019, Baltimore Police Department has had 2,380 confirmed IBIS hits. They're hits that we matched that a detective at the time did not know was connected to each other. It's not that they put a request in to compare it. We let them know through IBIS that these cases are connected to each other. The IBIS lead system went into effect September of 2018 for Baltimore Police. We were one of the first ones to actually put it into rotation. Since then, through basically the end of this month, May, we've sent out 475 IBIS leads, while only confirming due to a comparison to a request to compare this evidence and confirm it, we've only confirmed about 65 of those leads. So the other ones that we've put out, we've gotten no request to compare them and confirm that they are in fact a match. That would come from the investigator. It's helped with us in that we can do them quicker now because we're not inundated with IBIS confirmations. We're only confirming the ones that are requested. So if a request does come in, we're usually able to do that confirmation within the next 48 hours as long as we have the evidence at our disposal to be able to do that right away. One of the other systems we instituted with this lead system is a pre-screen system. What we had in Baltimore Police Department, because we were very much backlogged. We at one time were down to 5 full-time examiners. Evidence that was coming in from a shooting or homicide today was not even being put into the IBIS system, sometimes for up to a year. We would then finally get to that case. We'd put it in the system. We'd see, hey, this homicide from last year matches a homicide from the year before. We'd let the detective know it's been a year. They're 50 cases away from that one. It's really no help to them. So what we do now is evidence that's submitted to the crime lab that's firearms related, if it's IBIS eligible, meaning it has cartridge cases, that evidence is pre-screened. An examiner looks at that evidence with it's not microscopically, we use a jeweler's eye loupe to just go through if a case is submitted with 10 cartridge cases. Each one of those 10 cartridge cases is looked at. It's determined without microscopic work that there may be 2 examples of 2 different guns that might have been used in this case. One of each of them, so 2 examples would be put into the IBIS system. This is done within 48 hours of receiving that evidence with a potential lead that may come back to us being sent out to that detective, again, within 48 hours of the case actually happening. A lot of this is actually happening, we say 48 hours. Any evidence that we would get today will be pre-screened and put on the IBIS system by lunchtime tomorrow with a lead coming out immediately after that. So we're actually letting investigators know sometimes within 24 hours that their case may be connected to another case. Lets them speak to another detective who maybe has something that they didn't have. It's definitely getting the information out there quicker. It has definitely put a larger burden on firearms unit to get that information into the system as quickly as possible. So, as mentioned previously, and again, I'm not going to talk on it much. I don't have much information. There are different methods being used or researched for quantifying the firearms examination. A couple of these are the consecutive matching striae, consecutive matching cells, total matching lines, and percentage matching lines. I believe the next session is going to speak on different ways of quantifying that is being researched. So these are just some examples of research that is taking place, that's been taking place for quite some time and continues to take place to get us to some type of quantifiable answer regarding our matches or inconclusive, things of that nature. One system that is being used, not only through IBIS, as I noted, but there are companies and now labs using different microscopes that do 3D topography. Basically, what 3D topography does is it takes a super enhanced image of the cartridge case, letting you see different things that the naked eye may not be able to see under the microscope. Different labs are using 3D topography systems now. The FBI, I believe, does use that system. Baltimore Police actually put in for a 3D topography microscope. We did not get the grant for it. I believe the cost of it was about $130,000. So we are looking to it. We've done our research. We've had some presentations done for us to be able to see what it actually does and how it works. One of the good things about 3D topography is it does yield additional reliable, reproducible images for examiners. And 3D topography is working towards quantifying our science also. So they're working in conjunction with some of the other research going on to quantify that. One of the good things with 3D topography is if different labs have the same software, they're able to transfer those images back and forth, which is hopefully working towards what I was speaking of earlier, where you had to physically go to another lab to do the physical comparison. With these 3D topographical images getting more advanced, there's thoughts that that type of comparison may be able to be done over the computer at some point using the 3D topography rather than traveling between labs, which can get the information, again, quicker than we've ever been able to do it. One additional tool, final thing that I'm going to speak of, that this is one of the ones that's not really firearms examination related, but it's definitely impacting the firearms unit. And it's just another tool being used to fight the gun crime, especially in Baltimore City, which if you read the news, we're having a rough time. We're getting there though, I hope. This tool is called ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter is a private company that came up with this system that works with police departments. The way ShotSpotter works is it's a system of sensors that are placed throughout different areas of, and again, I'm going to use Baltimore City because we do actually have the system. Sensors are put in different areas throughout the city, most of them being high crime areas. What the sensors do is when a shot is fired, when guns are fired, those sensors instantly pick up that gunfire. ShotSpotter, within 60 seconds, will send information to their people. They claim, and some of it I have seen, that they'll tell you how many shots were fired. In some instances, they're even reporting what caliber may have been used. That information is sent to someone at ShotSpotter. They instantly review that information. If they determine that, yes, shots were fired, this needs to be alerted. Our patrol officers have a program, an app on their phone, that'll be sent directly to whoever's patrolling that area to let them know in the last 60 seconds, shots were fired in this area. They claim they can get the area down to within 60 feet of where those shots were fired. That instantly sends officers, without having to be dispatched, they're actually dispatched through the app to head to that area, possibly finding a shooting taking place, or at least someone maybe fleeing the scene, where before you're dispatching, that's going to take several minutes, maybe longer than that, to get an officer there. Just some quick stats on ShotSpotter that I found pretty interesting, because again, it's not a program that the lab is running, but it is something that we're starting to learn more about because we're getting a lot more evidence sent to us now. Baltimore City, the ShotSpotter system went live in the spring and summer of 2018. We have it in East Baltimore and West Baltimore. In 2018, there were 1,172 alerts from the ShotSpotter system. 80 of those, about 6.8%, had either a corresponding IBIS lead or hit, some of them multiple leads and hits, reaching out to different cases that we did not know about. Through April of 2019, ShotSpotter has had 775 alerts. 56 of those have had leads or hits. Again, some of them branching out to multiple cases that are now connected through the IBIS system. One thing that I found interesting about ShotSpotter is that a 2018 report for Baltimore City itself showed that about 18% of ShotSpotter calls had an associated 911 call. It means that 82% of those alerts from ShotSpotter where officers were then dispatched and possibly finding evidence of gunfire. We never received a 911 call. So an investigation never would have even taken place. When I say what that's doing for firearms examination is it's sending us more evidence, we're getting more evidence because officers are actually responding to scenes that they never would have responded to before because they were never alerted to the fact that there were shots fired, so they didn't know to go to that scene. So ShotSpotter is impacting firearms examination in that we're getting more work to do. So that's the last tool I have to speak about regarding firearms examination. I know that the research just continues. It can only make firearms examination, I think, better for the court system, better for what we do as we continue to do the research and move forward for firearms examination for not only us, but also for the legal system throughout the states. Thank you.
We got some questions.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Could you explain a little bit more about AFP's theory of identification and respond to PCAST's criticism that is circular in nature?
Sure. PCAST, give me 1 second, I apologize.
And there was one recent case that disallowed an examiner from testifying to a practical certainty.
The practical certainty is one that I believe that the term is reasonable degree of scientific certainty, which was brought up yesterday. And I believe somebody even said that it's kind of a non-point. It doesn't really mean anything. We don't use that term. If the term is asked of us in court by a state's attorney or a defense attorney, we explain that that term really doesn't have a meaning to it, that there's no way to explain what a reasonable degree of scientific certainty is. I believe the DOJ actually came out with something explaining that term wasn't being used.
I think I was actually referring to practical impossibility.
Practical impossibility is, for us, what we explain that practical impossibility means, at least for firearms examination, is that, and this is and AFTI does have a definition for it. It basically means that it's phrase that can't be expressed in mathematical terms. It describes an event that has an extremely small probability of occurring in theory, but which empirical testing and experience has shown will not occur. And that's based on, excuse me, that's based on extensive empirical research and validation studies. The cumulative results of training and casework examinations that either have been performed, peer-reviewed, or published in peer-reviewed forensic journals. The reason I explain it as practical impossibility, because it is brought up in court. You can't say a 100% impossibility, because the instant you do that, then you get asked, so every gun that's ever been manufactured has been compared to each other. That's where the term practical comes from. That no, obviously every gun has not ever been compared. Not every gun's ever even been looked at under a microscope to look at the marks. So practical impossibility just explains that based on our research and the testing and the casework that's happened over the years, the marks identified to any particular case will be found that produce marks exhibiting sufficient agreement of identification. What that means is these marks, based on all the testing that's been done and all the cases that have been examined, are unique to a particular firearm. And it's practically impossible for them to have been made by a different firearm. Yes.
So, first of all, I think you heard, if you were here yesterday, you know I was a member of PCAS.
Oh, no, I was here for part of yesterday. I got in late.
So it's kind of interesting to see how often that report is cited in this setting. But I have two other, a comment and a question. Let me start with the comment. I've actually driven around Baltimore by accident and seen the shot spotter.
Okay.
They sit up on the pole.
Yes, they are.
For those of you who haven't actually seen the technology, I got lost a couple of months ago and found myself in parts of the city I didn't know existed.
Yeah, it can happen quick.
Yeah, so that was an interesting experience. But my question has to do with the image that you said. On the 3D topography systems, and I know that you're not a scientist, but you're someone who has experience in the field. On the 3D topography systems, I've heard people raise the question, well, isn't this that kind of technology something that you might think about using facial recognition technology, and as a basic foundation to do the examination of the images? That's one question.
I've never heard it put that way, but I guess based on what the two are together, there is a similarity between that. You're absolutely right that is something that. And again, it could be being researched, but I can't give you an answer to that because I don't know, but it does make sense.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to ask, because I'm far removed from that, so it's a question that was put to me.
Okay.
And then the second question had to do with, since we're going to this 3D topography as a technology, do we have the empirical testing that gives us confidence that that's going to improve the situation?
My understanding is that there is testing that has taken place. As I said, I know there are systems, 3D topography systems that have been tested, have been validated, and are being used in some crime labs. Again, I mentioned FBI because I could be wrong about that, but I believe I read that the FBI is actually using, in conjunction with firearms examiners, a 3D topography system. Like I said, there is one out that we were looking to purchase. Has not happened yet because we didn't have the money. So yes, there definitely has been testing and validation that's taken place, or I would believe it wouldn't be being used, by anybody specifically for the system.
Thank you.
I believe there was one over.
I'm looking at an article in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, 2017, by John Murdoch and 7 others, several fire examiners, and they do talk about practical certainty. And I'm wondering if you would agree with their depiction. They say practical certainty in everyday life is predicated on that. There's a practical certainty that our car will start in the morning, that our normally obedient dog will come when called. Is that what the AFTE means, or practical certainty? Or by something being a practical impossibility, my car won't start tomorrow?
I can't speak as far into that, what AFTE is saying in regards to that response and your explanation.
It's not mine.
No. I mean, what you're reading to me. I don't know how they got to having that answer or their explanation of what you just read, being a practical certainty and practical impossibility. I guess, as it says, practical certainty happens every day in life. Practical impossibility, which is synonymous, I guess, it's just explained through all of the research and the cases that have been done that there haven't been incidences where two different, in this case, guns, left the same marks through all the years of study and research and casework. But again, I guess they have to keep it as practical impossibility due to, like I said, not every piece of evidence has ever been compared to each other, especially to every gun fired or manufactured over however many years it's taken place.
Do you have any concern that using the term practical impossibility kind of puts a statistical gloss on what's really subjective or experience-based observation? Like, why not just couch it in terms of based on the patterns I've seen in my work? Why kind of put it in this?
Yes, I do, to your first part about the concerns about it, which is why, I would suggest, or I would think that all of the research that's going into putting a quantifiable number on it. When I'm asked on the stand if I'm in court, I do explain that for me it is all the casework that I've seen over the years. I can't speak to anybody else's casework and what they've looked at when I've never looked at it. So I am specifically speaking for me to the casework that I've done, the marks that I've seen, all the evidence that I've looked at. But yes, it is questioned a lot, and like you said, it would be a definite move forward to be able to quantify it and put a number to it. Because yes, in saying that, it does in some ways lead to, you're saying some type of statistic, but what is the statistic? And that's what's being worked on. So yes, I agree with you. Yes.
Well, I mean, besides everything you've seen, you're also familiar with all the consecutively manufactured studies.
Yes.
And all of that. I mean, does that also inform your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. One of the big tests that we do, or I guess it's a test in the training, it's the Ruger 10 barrel test, which is consecutively manufactured barrels, which if ever you were going to get as close to markings being the same, that would be one of the tests that definitely explains how they're different and why they're different. That test is not an easy test. It takes some time, but it is, at the end of the day, these 10 consecutively rifled barrels are distinguishable from each other. once you know how to do it and know what you're looking for. So yes, it absolutely goes towards helping to show what we're saying.
I know we have more questions in the audience, but we need to give Jason his fair time as well. So we'll see if we have more time for questions at the end of the session. But we would like to move to Jason and have him give his presentation.
There we go. Got it? Got it? Whew. All right. Okay, so we're going to jump into this. One of the things I was asked to kind of present on is some new technology that's coming out and helping in forensic science. Specifically, this particular piece of equipment that we're going to talk about today is pertaining to firearms, but also crossing into the latent print side of things as well. So I want to begin with just a quick little newscast. So Foster & Freeman headquarters is over in the UK, and this was put on by the BBC about a year and a half ago when they heard about this technology coming out. So hopefully the sound will work. Hopefully it will play. If not, we're going to skip it. I just tested that one, so I'm not sure why it's not. Come back. Try one more time, and we're skipping. Oh, okay. So pretty much what they said in there is they just kind of talked about some of this new technology as they heard about it, and the ability to kind of get fingerprints where we couldn't develop fingerprints before, furthering forensic science. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But this system that we're calling Recover, it's a novel one-stage chemical fuming technique for the development of finger marks on metal surfaces. And for traditionally, metallic surfaces or metal surfaces are a difficult substrate to recover fingerprints from. And so in this particular case, when we're talking metals and dealing with major crimes that the crime scene investigators are responding to and law enforcement is responding to, we're referring to bullets and cartridge casings here, knives, metal blades, and then metals that have been washed or cleaned, and maybe items that have been thrown in rivers and lakes and situations like that. And then also metals that have been subjected to heat, so arson scenes, bombings, and then also spent shell casings where the heat from the casing actually being fired, the heat that's generated from the gun and that being fired can really wreak havoc, if you will, on the latent prints that were left behind or deposited on that item originally. So Recover has actually been this is a combined effort to kind of create this. It wasn't just Foster & Freeman thought, hey, this is a good idea, but a lot of people have put time and effort into this research and into this process to show that it works and to develop it. And so the initial discovery actually happened at Loughborough University over in the UK by Dr. Roberto King. He was actually working on his PhD under the direction of Dr. Paul Kelly there at Loughborough when this method was discovered. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. And then DSTL got involved. That's the Defense Sciences and Technology Laboratory over in the UK. They are kind of the research and development arm of the Ministry of Defense. Further advice and guidance was given by CAST, the Center for Applied Sciences and Technology, or referred to oftentimes as the Home Office. When it comes to latent prints, the Home Office has put together a finger mark visualization manual that is really used around the world when it comes to the different chemical processes for the development of latent fingerprints on items. And then Foster & Freeman for the refinement and actually commercialization of the product itself. So we'll talk a little bit about how this process works. There's a precursor chemical that's going to be used, and then you have your development chamber. And I've kind of set the chamber up here for us to look at. But the chemical that we're using, it's a black crystalline inorganic powder. It's going to undergo a phase change to generate a reactive gas. And then the finger marks will be developed via the polymerization mechanism. This is something for those of you that have heard of super glue processing. Superglue processing develops latent prints based on the polymerization mechanism. So this is very much working similar to the same way superglue works, in the sense that you're heating up a chemical and fingerprints are developed via the polymerization mechanism. The chamber itself, it's actually done in a very mild vacuum, but it's got an adaptable glass chamber with full 360-degree visibility. You can kind of see the glass chamber up there. That allows the person doing the chemical processing to actually examine the evidence as it's developing and see the development process as it's happening. The system itself has undergone some smart environmental management. We, as a company, sell items around the world. We have a climate chamber there in our headquarters there, so we make sure that this is going to work in the hot desert sun as well as in the frozen tundra of the world and everywhere in between, getting the same results wherever it goes. It's an automated process. You load the chamber in and kind of push button start to the system, and it runs and does its thing. There's a nice evidence rack in there that you can use to fill the chamber with all different types of evidence that you may be processing. And it does have a nice, nice intuitive graphical touch panel interface. So you can see the little 7-inch display screen on there. Again, just kind of touch button. And when we kind of talk about the process on this, going back also to the smart environmental management, when you first start the chamber, it actually goes through a series of tests, making sure that all the equipment inside is working properly. If it's not, the system's not going to run. So the way it kind of works is, again, you have your chamber here. You would suspend your evidence in there or put your evidence in there, whether it be kind of on the rack with the casings kind of sitting on a post, or you can clamp things in there. But you want as much of the surface exposed as possible. Your chemical is placed in the bottom of the chamber where there's a heating stage below that. The air and the moisture is vacuumed out of the chamber. Once all the air is out, the heating stage is then turned on. Heat is applied to the chemical, which creates this vapor that goes out, and your finger marks will be developed on the item itself. This new model that we have here, it's about a 1-hour processing time, so it's very, very quick. When this first came out, they were looking at about 24 hours to get development, so we've really refined that now, getting results back very, very quickly. Like I mentioned, it's a completely automated process, and the other thing that we do is all of the chemical actually comes pre-weighed, so that you should get the same results every single time. It comes in a little glass vial, you pop the top, set it down in there, and when you're done, put the cap back on, you can dispose of that, and the next run you do, you put in a new batch of chemical in there. It also does have an adjustable chamber capacity. The one we have on there right now is an 8x8 glass cylinder. It does have the ability to go up to a 16 by 8-inch glass cylinder if you've got a larger piece of evidence that you need processed. Recover, it's fairly new. This has actually just been introduced here around the world within the last several months. In fact, this model came out at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences conference this year in Baltimore that was held in February. But it's actually over 10 years in the making that this process has been happening, and they've been working on it. So like I mentioned, it was Dr. Roberto King who discovered it at Loughborough University under the direction of Dr. Paul Kelly. And he actually was just an inorganic chemist, had nothing to do with fingerprints or forensic science. And the process he was working on and the chemicals that he was playing with, he noticed that he was actually developing finger marks on items. He kind of published a couple of things on this in 2008, 2009, several papers that were published. And that's when they sought the assistance of DSTL and CAST, who came on to provide very strong support for the development of the Recover system itself. And it was about this time in 2010 that the project was actually marked as classified by the UK government. Dr. King was encouraged to continue to work on this, again working with DSTL and CAST on this. But again, it was classified by the UK government. Now, obviously, we don't know why it was classified by the UK government, because it was classified. However, in that news video clip, there's a representative from DSTL who talks about it, and he says this technology is being utilized to save lives of both UK forces and civilians. And we've talked to people who worked in labs over dealing with the war in Afghanistan who said, oh yeah, I worked with something very similar to that type thing. And so the speculation is the UK government classified it because they didn't want the bomb makers knowing that we were able to develop finger marks on the bombs. Otherwise, these people would change the way that they were manufacturing these things. Several people that work over there in the UK CAST office and DSTL used to work for the UK forces. And they would say that, you know, when there was an IED fragment and the bomb technician would come out and make safe the bomb, often crowds would gather, and in those crowds you often have bomb makers, and they would watch what the bomb technician was doing so that the next time they created a bomb, they'd go, oh, last time he kind of did this, and this to remedy it safe. We're going to throw a booby trap in there so that the next time he sees an IED fragment goes to do that again, it goes kaboom. And so, again, they kind of like to keep people out of it, and they wanted to keep this, I think, a little bit more top secret so that this information was not getting out to people. And then in 2017, Foster and Freeman bought the exclusive rights to commercialize this and manufacture it. Roberto King actually began working for Foster and Freeman in about 2011, so it was kind of a good match made in heaven. With Foster and Freeman being over there in the UK and being well known as a company that manufactures and builds quality forensic equipment. So again, this is the system that we're looking at. Like I said, they've improved the precursor chemical. They've made it safe and safe to use and simple to use, safe to handle. We've increased the processing times or expedited the processing times, like I said, down to under 1 hour now. And we've also worked on the and optimized some image methods for this as well. Obviously, once you develop a lake print, say on a spent shell casing, that being a rounded surface, that's difficult to photograph. So we've worked on ways to photograph those to make it easier for the lake print examiner and the forensic scientist working with that type of evidence. Anyway, some research that's been done on this shows that this is an extremely effective method, and it's really just kind of a turnkey solution, allowing labs to just kind of put it in there and begin to process this type of evidence. So again, there's your development chamber up top here. It's got a motorized lid that's going to go up and down, again, making room for that 16-inch cylinder if you need it. Down here you can see the little volcano. That's actually where your chemical goes, and then your touch panel interface. And so it makes it pretty user-friendly and easy to use. Yes, ma'am?
Maybe you can't say, what is the chemical?
I call it black magic, man, because it's fantastic. Right now, that is actually, we're not releasing that right now. We do give the MSDS sheets to laboratories when they buy it, but it is a black crystalline inorganic powder. Yes, ma'am.
So is the precursor chemical, is it detrimental to DNA?
We're doing some further research on that right now. We did, I'll answer that real quickly and then kind of continue the presentation. So back in 2000 and about 10 years ago, they did some testing on that. They put some blood droplets on a piece of glass, ran the glass through here. They got full profiles on all those drops of blood, even after processing. Well, those are drops of blood. They then did touch DNA, and I'm trying to think out of, I think it was out of 16 samples, they got 9 profiles on just touch DNA after processing. Now, when we say that again, we kind of keep in mind that was over 10 years ago. We've really improved the chemical since then, as well as DNA has developed substantially in the last 10 years is what they can do. So we're going to do some continued research on that, but we believe that if we were to do that now, that the results would actually be much higher on the touch DNA. We've also, I've traveled around to different laboratories around the country who have actually been doing experiments with that and validations of that where they process for DNA first, and then we put it in here to see if that affects the development of the fingerprints. But then we also, they swab for DNA or do their DNA testing, and then we put it in here to kind of see if we're getting it. And they have those results, and a lot of them will be publishing those as well. All right, so again, we kind of talked about how it works. I'll quickly talk about why it works, because this is kind of the fun part about it. So it will work via the conventional method. And by that I mean there is latent fingerprint residue on the item itself. All right, and there's a lot of processes that currently develop finger marks based on this technology. In fact, every process to develop fingerprints is based on this, the fingerprint residue is physically there, whether it's powders, whether it's super glue, whether it's a chemical like anhydride or indadione or DFO, reacting with some constituent of the latent fingerprint residue itself to develop that item. And so if there is fingerprint residue on an item, Recover will develop that. So example here, here's your sheet of metal. These white lines represent fingerprint residue there, and here's the developed chemical coming down, building up on that residue, polymerizing on that, and developing the fingerprints so we can see it. In practical application, this is what it looks like. Here's your piece of brass metal that's been touched with finger marks, placed in the chamber, and you can see the development of the finger marks from the Recover chemical itself. What makes Recover unique, and one of the reasons why people are getting very excited about this technology, is the fact that it also develops based on a unique mechanism. And by that I mean the latent residue does not need to be physically present to develop. Now when I'm talking about this, we are talking about only bare metals. And the reason why it works is we are now going to rely on the presence of a corrosion signature within the metal. And it's going to develop those finger marks based on a difference in surface energy of the metal itself. So bare metal, finger marks come in contact with this, the longer they sit on that piece of metal, it begins to corrode that metal. So if the latent residue is wiped away, burned away, a bullet shot from a gun where that latent residue is obliterated, there's still that corrosion on the metal, and that's what Recover is going to target and develop. So again, an example here, here's our piece of metal, our finger marks are placed on there. After approximately 30 minutes, you see corrosion on a very molecular level on that metal itself. So then when that residue is wiped away, washed away, cleaned, obliterated, that corrosion is still there. So now when we apply the chemical fume to it, it's still going to go down there and develop based on, again, that difference in surface energy. That's where it wants to polymerize, that's where it wants to build up. And this is what we see. So again, here's our plate being wiped down. You can see the finger marks on there before. So with a towel and some moisture, we wipe away those finger marks, hang it in the chamber, and this is what we're developing in that. Yes, ma'am?
Does it have to be a reactive kind of metal? Like would it work, gold is not reactive, so does it work on gold? Or does it only work on something that has more ability to react?
As long as it's a bare metal, it will work. Now, different metals are going to react a little bit differently. So for instance, and here in the United States, why we're so excited is, again, spent shell casings. I can say the recovery rate of latent fingerprints from spent shell casings is well below 1%. In fact, there are many labs around the country that have quit processing spent shell casings because the recovery rate is so low. The majority of cartridge casings, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Firearms Examiner, are kind of a brass and copper-based metal, but then also like an aluminum and a steel type metal. So as long as it's a bare metal, we're going to be able to develop that. Now, the aluminum and the steel is going to take a little bit longer time to begin to corrode, and also a little bit longer time to process. So I'm not getting into a ton of it because I only have about 15 minutes, but we actually, if you're going to process silver-colored metals, you use the same chamber, but we're actually going to use a little bit more chemical, and the process time is going to be a little bit longer than your standard copper. But the majority of copper or of casings are kind of the brass and copper-colored casings, and that's what we're seeing. And again, that's kind of what I'm basing the presentation on.
If I wanted to use heat to obliterate evidence on the whole gun, say, what kind of temperatures would I actually have to do to get there?
Well, so to obliterate it?
Yeah. Well, no, just to obliterate the signatures from my fingerprints.
I don't know the exact temperature on that. Do you know the temperature of a firearm, the temperature that comes out when you fire a bullet? Hot.
It's several hundred degrees.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact temperature, but it's...
Yeah. And so we know that based on that, it's doing it. But there's other factors as well, as far as, some of the gases coming back and helping almost wipe off some of that residue as well, and some other factors as well. I don't know the exact temperature that will actually remove fingerprint residue, but I think it would also depend on the type of surface it's on and other environmental conditions as well.
Jason, I assume that
that Foster and Freeman are claiming some kind of trade secret protection for black magic. Are there other parts of the process that Foster and Freeman would be claiming that there's a trade secret protection?
Actually, the whole chamber itself is, as far as the exact temperature that we're heating the chemical up to, and things like that. Yeah,
And because of that, is Foster and Freeman undertaking any kind of black box studies?
I'll get into the validations. Can I answer that question when I get to the validations?
Sure.
If we talk about that then? Okay. 5 minutes? Okay, I'm gonna fly through this. So again, just some other examples here. Again, metals that have been washed. Here's our imaging system over here that we're using to kind of help do that. We're using coaxial lighting, sometimes just diffuse lighting and things like that to get good results. But here's the big one. So here's a spent shell casing. Again, that's what you see before development. And after development, you can now see the ridge detail that was developed on that. And again, these marks were placed on the cartridge casing prior to being fired, not fired and then picked up and touched. Loaded in the magazine, fired from the gun, and then picked up. We have this part of our imaging system, we call it our cylindrical surface unwrapper, and in a sense what it does is it takes a three-dimensional item and it gives you a two-dimensional image. So you can see the casing behind it. We've in a sense unstitched that and pieced together small thin line images as that kind of rotates to give you then this three-dimensional image, which we can then enhance in our software and get good results for the forensic scientist to look at. Again, another example here, spent shell casings prints on a spent shell casing. And again, under the cylindrical surface unwrapper, being able to unwrap that to get a nice two-dimensional image for your forensic scientist to look at and examine. Again, enhanced in the software. Okay. Again, another study there, or another example there. Here's some IED fragments that developed some late marks on there as well. Now, one of the things in this, I think, is what will answer your question. This has actually been independently evaluated by CAST, the UK Home Office. They did about a 2-year validation study of this, and they have submitted a paper that's for peer review. From my understanding on this, they're actually waiting for one last person to kind of sign off on this, and then it's going to be published. So we anticipate, hopefully, that being published within the next several months. But that's going to be huge when it comes to recover on this. But one of the things that they kind of said through their validation study in this article that's going to be published is that recover has proven to consistently outperform existing techniques on a wide range of evidence types for the development of fingerprints. The other thing too is Foster and Freeman continues to do ongoing testing to explore the limits of recover. I can quickly show you some of these. These are different fingerprints on brass plates. This was in a diluted bleach. The prints were aged on there for about an hour and then submerged in the diluted bleach for 7 days and then processed with recover using coaxial illumination, and that's what we're able to develop. Salt water, again, aged for 1 hour, submerged for 7 days, coaxial illumination. Soaked in vinegar, the prints aged for 24 hours, submerged for 7 days, coaxial illumination. This is your stainless steel. Diluted bleach, again, aged for about an hour, submerged for 7 days. This is using coax lighting. This was in salt water, aged for 24 hours, submerged for 7 days using white light. And again, vinegar, aged for an hour, submerged for 7 days using white light. And you can see the results that we're getting on these items. Fantastic. Again, some of these other processes that are out there aren't going to be able to get you these type of results. Yes, ma'am.
Have any company representatives been called to court to testify?
Not yet, because we just started selling the system. But I do know that there's several people around the world that have purchased these, and they're pretty happy with it. And as far as it goes, I've talked to several late print examiners. The process itself is pretty simple as far as we know that the chemical going up is developing it, so we know it's working. No different than kind of super glue and some of these other processes for developing finger marks. Generally, where you create your issues with late print examination in court is more on the examination side of things rather than kind of the development side of things.
And you're not suggesting that laboratories, when you use, I'm going to change your phrasing of it. but you suggested that this was essentially plug and play. You're not suggesting that labs should do their own internal validation of the product and
Oh, no. What I'm saying, yeah, every lab, once they get it, should be doing a validation on it. In addition to reading the validation, absolutely. As with any piece of evidence or any piece of the equipment that goes into a lab, all equipment should be validated by that particular agency before being put into use for the actual casework.
How long do you actually have to touch the weapon for that corrosive effect to happen? You mentioned an hour, you don't have to hold it for an hour.
No. Once the residue's on there, then that residue is going to begin to kind of corrode down in there. I mean, there's different constituents of the sweat. We have salts, we have amino acids in there, we have oils. All of that is going to begin to corrode. And again, a lot of that is also going to be donor dependent, right? We know from doing chemical processes with other types of chemicals that sometimes you just have a poor donor. They just don't sweat a lot. And if they're not sweating a lot, don't leave behind residue, you're not going to develop a finger mark. Then you get people like me that sweat like a racehorse, and I touch an item and holy cow, I'd be a horrible criminal because anything I touch, I'll leave prints behind on, right? So again, a lot of that's going to be donor dependent. We're going to go over here, and then we'll come to you, man. We'll go over here.
2 questions.
Yep.
We found that it works it's dependent on environmental conditions, like Arizona is super dry where I'm at. We even have to add moisture to our prints, in CA chamber versus say Florida or something. Have you found that environmental conditions affect that?
Not really, because it's being done in a vacuum on that particular one. And again, now some of that is going to affect obviously the material itself. In the heat, I lived in Vegas for years. It's a lot drier. You don't leave behind as much residue as now living in Virginia, where I'm constantly wet, and I leave behind prints everywhere I touch. So again, it will affect kind of how people touch things and things like that. But that's going to be with any type of evidence.
Okay, and then there's the precursor chemical floatable for labs to keep replacing even more than one.
Yes. So ultimately, the copper in this size one is roughly about $15 a run. And people often ask, well, how much can I fit in a chamber? And my smart aleck response is, how long is a piece of string? As long as you can fit it in there, it's going to process. And so you get creative. When I was in a lab doing super glue fuming, you load that bad boy up and do your processing. So it's kind of as much as you can fit in there to do the processing. So it is affordable, absolutely, compared to a lot of other methods that are out there currently available.
Has the cylindrical and wrapper been validated?
Yes.
And would that be information that the company would provide to the validation studies or any of the underlying data to in court processes? Because
it's all done in the software program and using our software, and all of that is actually tracked. And so anytime that you use it, it actually does a complete audit log of exactly what's happening and exactly what's being done.
okay, so there's an output that someone can
Yes.
can view on how the image was changed.
Correct. And it wasn't changed. All you're doing is just taking a thin line image and it's being stitched together. So you're not changing the image at all. All you're doing is just
Well, it's still being augmented, so depending on how
it's being processed. Yes.
or
Correct.
processed.
Yes, and all of that's being audited.
That would have a huge impact.
Correct. And that's all being audited and logged for the examiner to have. Yes. Thank you. Other questions, sir?
Well, it's a bit over the horizon. First of all, this is extraordinarily exciting technology because what you're actually doing is looking, as you said, not at the residence level, the signature of the residue of the material.
Correct.
One could well imagine, however, probes are getting that information not by polymerization, but by some sort of scattering of light, for example, or other means where and I'm curious whether people are actually exploring the basic idea is that you're no longer looking at residue, you're looking at physical changes in the material. There are other ways to get that information. Are you aware of folks looking at that?
I think there's a lot of labs looking at that. We look at we manufacture alternate light sources, and so we're looking at that as well. This is just one that actually brings it out, and then utilizing this process because it does polymerize and build up. Then using scattered light. Some examples that I didn't show on here is actually using reflected UV imaging, so long wave UV light, which is it scatters readily. Utilizing that after like a super glue process or even a recover process to develop better finger marks for your examiners. Yes.
Is there any measurement of the persistence of this residue or whatever it is you're testing, the signature? Is it a matter of weeks, months, years? How long Could we gauge approximately how long that this signature has been present?
No. And that's pretty much almost like any other fingerprint process. When I was doing fingerprint examination, I can't ever tell you how long the item's been there. And people are like, oh, so that means that person did this. No. I developed a fingerprint on the rearview mirror of a car, so that means the person stole the car. No. All I can testify to is at some point, this person, say, right thumb, came in contact with that rearview mirror. That's all I can testify to. So I don't know the other circumstances behind it. And so again, this is going to be kind of the same thing. And we don't know how long that they've been touched or anything like that. But just at some point, this fingerprint came in contact with that surface.
I know we have a lot more questions in the room. I apologize. We want to get the next presentations in. We will make our presenters available next door. If you have more questions, and I think they're going to be here for a little while, so you can engage with them. But again, we wanted to present this not necessarily just about recovery. I appreciate Jason talking about this technology, but it's more about having things come from research science, transferring them to the field through the appropriate processes, validation studies, and all those kind of things. And I'm excited. In my lab, we call it the Chamber of Miracles. But we're excited to get this product into our lab and start the validation process with the other labs that are using it across the country, because there is still a lot of work, I think, that we need to do on this technology to implement it and use it in the courtroom. But we want you to be aware that these kind of initiatives are happening around the country and around the world, and we're excited about these new developments and new opportunities to tech transfer. So again, we'll make them available next door if you're interested in asking them some more questions.
And I'm just going to end with one thing on that note. Having now be kind of like, I refer to myself as being on the opposite side of the table now as a vendor side of things. That's one of the things. I go around and go to a lot of conferences, and we take a lot of feedback from people, the forensic scientists who say, what would be really cool is, what if you started looking at light to do something like that? And we take that back, and we have research and development teams that start looking at stuff like that to try to improve product and try to improve technology for forensics.
Thank you.